You're listening to What in the World, brought to you by Great World Productions. I'm your host, Isaac Hedges, joined once again by co-host Jacob Fulmer. Jake, what in the world are we looking at today?
Well, we are going to be finishing up our first series on what in the world over our first 10 questions of human nature and psychology. That has been our first, I guess you could say, our category for our first 10 questions. So
Mhm.
we're going to be looking at the final two questions in that category. So we'll start off with our ninth question, which is what makes a memory feel important?
Oh, gee, that's a great question, Jake, and it sort of reminds me of a question we had earlier about why do we most remember the things that are negative, something along those lines. And I would say, in terms of that, well, it sort of depends on here, I guess, exactly what is meant by, okay, like a significant memory. And I would say this is sort of another way of asking that same question. I would say what makes a memory seem significant or consequential is just that as being consequential. And as we previously discussed, which I maintain, is that the negative memories tend to be the most consequential. Jake?
Yeah, I think so. And I think as far as we have to define important, and I guess everybody has a different definition of what's important to them or what is important just in general. But as far as for me, important is something of significance, something that I really need to take notice of. And
Right.
so, what makes a memory feel like it's worth remembering? I think it really has to do with, does this memory have an effect on me? Does it have lasting impact? And
Right.
so did this memory, was it a moment that was life changing? A life changing moment could be, let's say, a marriage, a graduation, getting a job, retirement, etc. Just certain things like that, welcoming a child into the world, learning about a new family member, or something unfortunate, of course, could be a family member passing away. That felt very important because that person was very important. And so I think it almost has to do with the people who are involved. How important are the people that are involved? Are they people who are total strangers, or are they people that we know very deeply? And so when we know someone very deeply, whatever happens involving them, it feels very important.
Sure. In other words, will this event be consequential to the long-term trajectory of my life? And if so, well, then it's probably important. So, put simply, I would define it that way. Say, memory feels or is important if it is consequential to the long-term trajectory of your life. And again, that definition still is largely subjective, but I reckon memory is as well. So that's probably appropriate. Jake?
Yeah, I think so. And so, again, I think it also has to do with the people that are involved as far as consequential. Of course, the people who are closer to us, whatever happens with them is going to make it feel more consequential. And so I think that kind of
Naturally.
ties into that as well. So, what defines a memory as important, or what makes us I mean, I think we could almost replace the word important with memorable, really. What makes a
Sure.
memory very memorable? And I guess
Right.
the word memorable is it's kind of silly to
Right.
define
It
the
would be
word using the
redundant to
word.
say that exactly. But
Yes,
I
but
see
I
what you're
think it's the
saying.
it's the same idea. What makes a memory worth remembering? What makes it worth um, replaying in your mind? What makes a memory valuable? I think the word
Right.
valuable would be a really good substitute for important, because when we talk about value, sometimes we think about actual monetary value, but the word value can mean a whole lot of different things. It can mean value within friendships, within trust. Of course, trust is something that we've covered within this same set of questions in previous episodes. And so I think it kind of goes back down to that as well.
Absolutely. Certainly see the immediate correlation there, of course, between value, of course, and monetary value. That isn't so much the case in terms of memories. Of course, those aren't things that you can directly, at least not to my knowledge, exchange in monetary terms, but that would be interesting to see, but sort of an immaterial thing, would you say? Not sort of the thing you think about exchanging,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
very interesting nonetheless.
All right. Any other thoughts on this question before we go to our final question in this series?
Well, can't say that I have a great many, no.
All right. Well, then that will lead us into the final question in the human nature and psychology section. Again, we are going to be looking at 100 questions about anything and everything within this first set of this series, but this is the first part of our first set that we are finishing up here. So, here's the final question in this series. Question number 10. How do people decide who they want to become? I feel like this may be the most loaded question that we have ever seen here on What in the World.
Sure, an appropriate one to end this section with, Jake, of course. As you mentioned, these questions regarding human nature and psychology. Again, a very interesting topic indeed, and it seems appropriate to cap that off with such a major question as this one. Who or how do people decide who they want to become? It's a great question, and we've talked about previously, certainly questions in this series already, sort of the role that a parent has in those formative years, as we talked about on a child, and certainly the term role model came up, and I would say that term would come into play a good deal here in terms of how people decide who they want to become down the line. I'd say that's influenced a great deal by role models that might be present in their formative years from very early on. The most basic sort of early resemblance of an idea that we get about what we want to do, there's a good chance it comes from a role model, it comes from somewhere else. It's much less likely that it's something that you're coming up with entirely on your own. So I'd say that that would play a big role in it, Jake.
Yes, I think so too. You know, you mentioned the word role model, and I feel like that's very appropriate given this question, very important to look at as far as, people find somebody and they're like, that's the person that I want to be. I want to become like that person. And they look at certain qualities of that person, you know. Um, are they this? Are they that? And they say, well, I want to have those qualities when I grow up. And so I want to be like that role model. And so I think when we go back to the original question, how do people decide who they want to become? They see traits of other people that resemble the traits that they want to have. And then they decide that's what I want to resemble when, you know, 10 years down the line. That's something that I want to continue to improve upon. So I feel like that's kind of the answer to the central question, at least in my opinion, is they pick up on traits that they see of other people, relate that to people and the traits that they relate most to, and then they want to become that person because they see those traits from other people.
Absolutely, Jake. And we talk about this, or certainly to this point, we've talked about this more in terms of a child. Certainly, that's where it begins, but it certainly doesn't end there, which is also worth noting. Of course, this question doesn't specify that we're referring to a child here. This could be something that occurs later on in life, though it likely takes root at a much younger age, as we say in those formative years. That's why we call them the formative years. Real shocker, I know. But again, certainly for different stages in life, again, it's important to have a role model, someone to look up to. even for adults. And again, certainly from a young age, a child is naturally going to be looking most directly towards parents, people most immediately in their life. They're going to have the greatest influence. So that's a major thing. Certainly, I recall, certainly in my case, grandparents, parents, certainly my grandfather, major role model. And of course, down the line, that can be a major thing. Of course, you decide what sort of career field you want to go into and find, oh, say, someone who's successful in that field. What you want to do with it, well, perhaps you could learn a little something from them.
Yeah,
Jake?
certainly so. And so those role models certainly shape who we want to become, and we learn things from them. And then that is how we become those individuals that we seek. And so I think that pretty much concludes this episode here of What in the World, along with, of course, this being the last week of February. We have now finished the month of February on What in the World, but we have also finished up the section of human nature and psychology. Next week, in the month of March, for the first week of March, we will be going into the next section, which is relationships and social life. And that is the next section of questions that you can expect to find here on What in the World.
Absolutely. Great things coming your way on What in the World. Again, just one of the many great offerings of Great World Productions. You'll see a lot of great stuff coming throughout the year here, 2026, of course. And we end on that, the note with the importance of role models and things of that nature. Most people have had a role model at some point, and if you're lucky enough to still have some living role models out there, well, consider saying something to them, thanking them. It may just be worthwhile, and surely they'll appreciate that. And I believe that about wraps it up for now. And so until next time.
I'm Jacob Falmer.
And I'm Isaac Kedges, host of What in the World. From all of us at What in the World and Great World Productions, good night and God bless.